In the heat of a crowded military briefing room, where tension hung thick as smoke and every decision could mean life or death, General Marcus Hartwell's voice cut through the air like a blade. His finger pointed directly at the young soldier standing at attention, her uniform crisp despite the chaos of the ongoing mission. "Remove that patch," he barked, his weathered face flushed with anger and disbelief. What happened next would shake the very foundations of military hierarchy, challenge everything the seasoned general thought he knew about courage and sacrifice, and reveal a truth so profound that it would haunt him for the rest of his career. The patch in question wasn't just a piece of fabric sewn onto a uniform. It was the key to unlocking one of the most extraordinary stories of heroism, deception, and redemption ever witnessed on a battlefield. This is the story of how one moment of mistaken judgment led to the discovery of a hero whose identity had been hidden in plain sight, and how a general's demand for conformity revealed the most unconventional act of bravery he would ever encounter. The truth about that patch, and the person wearing it, would change everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Resolute, a forward operating base nestled in the unforgiving terrain of eastern Afghanistan. General Marcus Hartwell stood at the window of his temporary command center, watching the daily ritual of soldiers preparing for another day in one of the world's most dangerous regions. At 58, Hartwell had seen more conflict than most men could stomach in 3 lifetimes. His steel-gray hair and the deep lines etched around his eyes told stories of countless battles, difficult decisions, and the weight of command that had shaped him into one of the military's most respected leaders. The general had arrived at Camp Resolute just 3 days earlier as part of a routine inspection tour. But routine was a word that held little meaning in this part of the world. Intelligence reports had been flooding in about increased insurgent activity in the surrounding valleys, and what was supposed to be a standard visit had quickly evolved into something far more complex. The base, which housed approximately 800 personnel from various units, had become a critical staging point for operations aimed at disrupting enemy supply lines and protecting civilian populations in nearby villages. As Hartwell reviewed the morning briefings, his aide, Lieutenant Colonel Janet Pierce, knocked and entered with a stack of reports that seemed to grow thicker each day. Pierce, a sharp-minded officer in her early 40s, had been working closely with the general for over 2 years and had developed an almost intuitive understanding of his command style and priorities. "Sir, we have the updated casualty reports from yesterday's patrol," Pierce said, her voice carrying the weight of news that was never easy to deliver. 3 wounded, but all are stable and expected to make full recoveries. The patrol leader, Sergeant Rodriguez, wants to brief you personally about what they encountered in Sector 7. Hartwell nodded, his expression remaining stoic despite the relief he felt that the casualties weren't more severe. Every wounded soldier was someone's child, spouse, or parent, and the responsibility of their safety weighed heavily on every decision he made. "Schedule the briefing for 1400 hours. What else do we have?" "There's been an unusual development with one of our reconnaissance units," Pierce continued, consulting her notes. "Unit Charlie 7 has been consistently outperforming expectations on their missions. They've successfully completed 12 high-risk operations in the past 6 weeks without a single casualty, which is remarkable given the nature of their assignments." The general's interest was immediately piqued. In his experience, such exceptional performance was either the result of extraordinary skill, exceptional luck, or something else entirely. Given the dangerous nature of the region and the sophisticated tactics employed by insurgent forces, sustained success without losses was nearly impossible to achieve through luck alone. "Who's commanding Charlie 7? Hartwell inquired, walking to his desk where detailed unit rosters lay organized in precise stacks. "The unit is officially under Captain Marcus Thompson, but there's something interesting about their operational structure," Pierce replied. "According to the reports, much of their tactical success can be attributed to their scout, a soldier who goes by the call sign Phoenix. This individual has been responsible for identifying and neutralizing numerous threats before they could engage the unit." Hartwell frowned slightly. In his decades of military experience, he had learned to be suspicious of any soldier who seemed too good to be true. While he appreciated exceptional performance, he also understood that the fog of war could sometimes create legends that didn't quite match reality. "I want to meet this Phoenix. Arrange for Charlie 7 to report for a comprehensive briefing tomorrow morning." "There's one more thing, sir," Pierce added, her tone suggesting some hesitation. "Phoenix appears to wear an unauthorized patch on their uniform. It's been noted in several reports, but given their performance, local commanders have been reluctant to address it." The general's expression hardened immediately. Military regulations existed for important reasons, and unauthorized modifications to uniforms were not only against protocol, but could potentially compromise unit cohesion and discipline. Exceptional performance, while appreciated, did not grant anyone the right to disregard established military standards. Unauthorized patch. Hartwell's voice carried the edge that subordinates had learned to recognize as a warning. What kind of patch are we talking about? From the descriptions, it appears to be a small embroidered phoenix, worn on the left shoulder where unit designations are typically displayed. Some reports suggest it might be a personal memorial or tribute, but no. One has been able to get clear information about its significance. Hartwell walked back to the window, his mind processing this information. Throughout his career, he had encountered soldiers who believed their achievements earned them special privileges or exemptions from military regulations. While he respected courage and competence, he also understood that discipline and adherence to protocol were fundamental to military effectiveness. The moment soldiers began to believe they were above regulations was often the moment when units began to break down. The afternoon heat was beginning to intensify outside, and the general could see soldiers moving with the measured efficiency that characterized life on a forward operating base. Everyone had a role to play, and everyone understood the importance of following established procedures. It was this adherence to structure and protocol that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments, and had earned him the respect of both superiors and subordinates. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce, I want you to send word to Captain Thompson that I'll be personally reviewing Charlie 7's operations tomorrow at 0800 hours. Hartwell decided. Make it clear that I expect full compliance with all uniform regulations. If this Phoenix has earned recognition for exceptional service, there are appropriate channels for acknowledging such contributions that don't involve unauthorized modifications to military uniforms. Pierce nodded and made notes on her clipboard. She had worked with General Hartwell long enough to understand that his insistence on protocol wasn't about rigidity for its own sake, but rather about maintaining the standards that kept military units functioning effectively under the most challenging circumstances. As the day progressed, Hartwell found himself thinking more about Charlie 7 and their mysterious scout. The reports he reviewed showed a pattern of tactical excellence that was genuinely impressive. The unit had successfully completed missions in areas where other teams had encountered significant resistance. They had rescued civilian contractors from a hostile situation, disrupted several weapons caches, and provided crucial intelligence that had led to the capture of 3 high-value targets. What made their success even more remarkable was the nature of the terrain they operated in. The region around Camp Resolute was characterized by steep mountain valleys, dense forests, and numerous caves and hiding spots that provided excellent cover for insurgent forces. Navigation was treacherous, communication was often spotty due to the geography, and the constant threat of improvised explosive devices made every movement potentially deadly. During his evening briefing with the base commander, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Hartwell learned more about the local tactical situation. Mitchell, a career infantry officer who had been commanding the base for 8 months, spoke with obvious respect about Charlie 7's contributions to overall mission success. General, I have to tell you that Phoenix has been instrumental in our recent achievements, Mitchell explained as they reviewed tactical maps of the region. This soldier has an almost supernatural ability to read the terrain and anticipate enemy movements. I've seen battlefield intelligence reports that are so accurate they seem impossible, but they keep proving correct. That kind of exceptional performance is certainly noteworthy, Hartwell acknowledged. But exceptional performance doesn't excuse violations of uniform regulations. Tomorrow, I'll be meeting with the unit personally to address both their achievements and their adherence to military standards. Colonel Mitchell's expression suggested she understood the general's position, but there was also something in her demeanor that indicated she felt there might be more to the situation than appeared on the surface. Sir, I think you'll find that meeting very enlightening. Phoenix is quite remarkable. That evening, as Hartwell prepared his notes for the next day's meeting, he reflected on the countless soldiers he had encountered throughout his career. The military attracted individuals from all walks of life, each bringing their own skills, backgrounds, and motivations to the service of their country. Some soldiers were motivated by patriotism, others by the desire for education or career opportunities, and still others by the need to prove themselves or find a sense of purpose and belonging. What united all effective soldiers, regardless of their personal motivations, was their willingness to subordinate individual desires to the needs of the unit and the mission. This principle of collective discipline over individual expression was fundamental to military effectiveness, and it was something Hartwell had observed and enforced throughout his career. As he prepared for sleep in his austere quarters, the general made a mental note to approach the next day's meeting with Charlie 7, with both an appreciation for their exceptional performance and a firm commitment to maintaining the standards that had served the military well for generations. He had no way of knowing that this routine enforcement of military regulations would lead to one of the most profound revelations of his career. The night passed quietly at Camp Resolute, with only the occasional sound of distant patrols and the hum of generators providing electrical power to essential systems. In a few hours, General Hartwell would meet Phoenix face to face, and both their lives would be forever changed by the encounter. The morning briefing room at Camp Resolute was a converted shipping container that had been modified to accommodate tactical meetings and operational planning sessions. Metal folding chairs arranged in precise rows faced a wall covered with maps, satellite imagery, and mission status boards that told the story of ongoing operations throughout the region. The air conditioning unit hummed constantly, fighting against the rising heat that would soon make the Afghan morning feel like the inside of an oven. General Hartwell arrived at the briefing room precisely at 0800 hours, his uniform immaculate and his bearing reflecting the confidence and authority that came from decades of military leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce followed closely behind, carrying files that contained detailed information about Charlie 7's recent missions and personnel records. The general's reputation for punctuality and attention to detail was well known throughout the military hierarchy, and subordinates had learned that his expectations for preparedness and professionalism were non-negotiable. Captain Marcus Thompson was already present when the general entered, standing at attention alongside 4 other members of his unit. Thompson, a lean man in his early 30s, with the weathered look of someone who had spent considerable time in combat zones, had been commanding Charlie 7 for nearly a year. His service record indicated multiple combat deployments and commendations for leadership under fire, but like many officers operating in forward positions, he had learned to balance military protocol with the practical realities of keeping his soldiers alive and mission-ready. "Captain Thompson," General Hartwell began, his voice carrying the authority that came naturally after years of command. "I've been reviewing your unit's performance reports, and I must say they make for impressive reading. 12 successful missions without casualties is an exceptional achievement given the operational environment." "Thank you, sir," Thompson replied, his posture remaining rigid. "My soldiers have performed with distinction, and I'm proud to serve alongside them." Hartwell's eyes moved across the assembled soldiers, taking note of their equipment, bearing, and overall appearance. Military leaders developed an ability to assess personnel quickly, reading subtle signs that indicated everything from morale and discipline to combat readiness and unit cohesion. What he saw in Charlie 7 was a group of soldiers who carried themselves with quiet confidence and professional competence. "I understand that much of your tactical success can be attributed to your unit scout," the general continued. "Where is Phoenix?" "I was expecting to meet this exceptional soldier." Captain Thompson's expression shifted slightly, and General Hartwell noticed what appeared to be a moment of hesitation before the captain responded. "Sir, Phoenix is currently conducting perimeter reconnaissance and should be returning shortly. The mission schedule required an early departure, but Phoenix should be available for briefing within the hour." The general frowned. In his experience, when a commanding officer specifically requested the presence of particular personnel, competent unit leaders ensured those individuals were available. The fact that Phoenix was absent suggested either poor planning on Thompson's part or some other factor that the captain had not yet disclosed. "Captain, when I schedule a briefing for 0800 and specifically request the presence of all personnel, I expect all personnel to be present," Hartwell said, his tone carrying unmistakable displeasure. Phoenix's reconnaissance mission should have been planned around this meeting, not the other way around. Before Thompson could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps could be heard outside the briefing room. The door opened, and a figure in full combat gear entered, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable with military equipment and tactical situations. The soldier was of average height with a lean build, face partially obscured by tactical eyewear, and the brimmed cap that was standard issue for reconnaissance operations. "Phoenix reporting as ordered, sir," the soldier said, voice clear and professional as they came to attention. General Hartwell's attention immediately focused on the unauthorized patch that was clearly visible on the soldier's left shoulder. It was exactly as described in the reports, a small, intricately embroidered phoenix with wings spread, rendered in rich colors that stood out distinctly against the standard military uniform. The craftsmanship was exceptional, suggesting this was not some hastily applied modification, but rather something that had been carefully designed and professionally manufactured. "Phoenix," the general said, his voice taking on the edge that subordinates had learned to recognize as a precursor to disciplinary action. I see the reports about your unauthorized uniform modification were accurate. That patch is not regulation military insignia, and it has no place on a United States Army uniform. The soldier remained at attention, but General Hartwell noticed something in Phoenix's posture that suggested this was not an unexpected confrontation. There was no surprise, no defensiveness, just patient acceptance of what was clearly a familiar criticism. "Sir, I understand your concern about uniform regulations," Phoenix replied, voice steady and respectful. "The patch has personal significance, and I had hoped that my service record might earn some consideration for this small deviation from standard protocol." "Personal significance?" Hartwell's voice rose slightly, echoing off the metal walls of the converted shipping container. "Soldier, personal significance does not supersede military regulations. Every member of this armed forces understands that individual expression is subordinated to unit cohesion and military discipline. Your exceptional performance, while noted and appreciated, does not grant you exemptions from the rules that govern all service members." The general paused, his gaze fixed on the patch that seemed to shimmer slightly in the artificial lighting of the briefing room. Something about the soldier's calm acceptance of his criticism was beginning to intrigue him, but his commitment to military protocol remained firm. "Furthermore," he continued, "the fact that your commanding officers have allowed this violation to continue suggests a breakdown in leadership that concerns me greatly. Captain Thompson, how do you explain permitting this clear violation of uniform regulations in your unit?" Captain Thompson shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between his respect for Phoenix's contributions and his understanding of military protocol. "Sir, Phoenix's performance has been so exceptional that local commanders felt the patch represented a minor issue compared to the tactical advantages this soldier provides to our missions." "Minor issue?" General Hartwell's voice carried disbelief. "Captain, there are no minor issues when it comes to military discipline. The moment we begin making exceptions based on individual performance is the moment we begin undermining the very foundation of military order." Phoenix remained silent during this exchange, but General Hartwell noticed that the soldier's breathing remained steady and controlled, despite the obvious tension in the room. There was something about Phoenix's composure that suggested experience with difficult situations and the ability to remain focused under pressure. "Phoenix," the general said, turning his attention back to the scout, "remove that patch immediately. I don't care what personal significance it may have, and I don't care how exceptional your service record may be. Military regulations exist for important reasons, and they apply to everyone equally." The soldier's head tilted slightly, and for a moment General Hartwell thought he detected something that might have been amusement in Phoenix's expression, though it was difficult to read through the tactical eyewear and the shadows cast by the cap brim. "Sir, removing the patch would be complicated," Phoenix said, voice still maintaining its respectful tone. "Perhaps we could discuss this matter privately, where I could explain the circumstances that make this situation somewhat unique." General Hartwell felt his patience beginning to wear thin. In his decades of military experience, he had encountered every possible excuse and justification for violations of military protocol. Soldiers who believed their circumstances were unique or special were common, and his response was always the same: regulations applied to everyone equally, regardless of individual situations. "There is nothing unique about uniform regulations, soldier," he replied firmly. "They are clear, they are non-negotiable, and they apply to every member of this military regardless of rank, service record, or personal circumstances. Remove the patch now, or I will have you written up for insubordination in addition to uniform violations." The other members of Charlie 7 exchanged glances, and Captain Thompson appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Phoenix, however, remained calm and seemed to be considering the general's ultimatum carefully. "General Hartwell," Phoenix said, voice taking on a slightly different tone, "I have served with distinction in this unit and others for several years. My service record speaks for itself, and my contributions to mission success have been documented extensively. I am asking respectfully for the opportunity to explain the significance of this patch in a private setting, where the full context of the situation can be properly discussed." The general studied Phoenix more closely, noting the confidence in the soldier's voice and the respectful but firm manner in which the request was being made. There was something about this interaction that felt different from the typical excuses he heard from soldiers trying to justify violations of military protocol. "The context is simple," Hartwell replied. "You are wearing unauthorized insignia on a military uniform, and you have been ordered to remove it. What additional context could possibly be relevant to this straightforward situation?" Phoenix was quiet for a long moment, and General Hartwell could sense that some kind of internal decision was being made. The other soldiers in the room seemed to be holding their breath, as if they understood that something significant was about to happen. "Sir," Phoenix said finally, "the patch cannot be easily removed because it covers something that would be distracting in a military environment. The patch serves a practical purpose beyond personal significance." General Hartwell's eyebrows raised. This was a new excuse, and one that he found particularly incredulous. "Distracting? Soldier, I have seen every possible type of scar, tattoo, and marking that combat personnel can acquire. Nothing on a military uniform could be more distracting than unauthorized modifications to that uniform." The tension in the room seemed to increase, and Captain Thompson appeared to be struggling with whether to intervene in the conversation. Phoenix looked toward the other members of the unit, then back at General Hartwell. "General, I respectfully request that we continue this discussion privately," Phoenix said. "What I need to show you is best handled away from the rest of the unit." The firmness in Phoenix's voice, combined with the obvious discomfort of the other soldiers present, finally convinced General Hartwell that there might be more to this situation than a simple case of uniform violation. His curiosity was beginning to overcome his irritation, and his experience told him that sometimes the most unusual situations required flexibility in approach. "Very well," he said after a moment. "Captain Thompson, dismiss the rest of your unit. Phoenix, you will remain for a private discussion about this patch and whatever it is you believe justifies violating military regulations." The briefing room fell into an uncomfortable silence as the other members of Charlie 7 filed out, leaving General Hartwell alone with Phoenix and Lieutenant Colonel Pierce, who remained to take notes as was standard protocol for meetings involving potential disciplinary actions. The general positioned himself behind the small table that served as a desk, while Phoenix remained standing at attention, the controversial patch clearly visible in the harsh fluorescent lighting. General Hartwell had conducted thousands of private meetings with subordinates throughout his career, addressing everything from personal problems and family emergencies to serious violations of military law. His experience had taught him to read people quickly, to identify when soldiers were being truthful versus when they were attempting to manipulate situations to their advantage. What struck him about Phoenix was the complete absence of the nervous energy that typically characterized soldiers who were trying to talk their way out of disciplinary action. "All right, Phoenix," the general began, settling into his chair and fixing the soldier with a stern gaze. "We are now in a private setting, as you requested. I want you to explain to me exactly why you believe you have the right to wear unauthorized insignia on your military uniform, and why you think this patch cannot be removed." Phoenix shifted slightly, and General Hartwell noticed that the soldier's hands moved to the tactical eyewear that had remained in place throughout their conversation. With a smooth motion, Phoenix removed the glasses, revealing features that immediately caught the general's attention. The face that had been partially concealed was distinctly feminine, with high cheekbones and intelligent eyes that held a steady, direct gaze. "Sir," Phoenix said, voice now carrying subtle tones that the general was beginning to recognize as distinctly female. "My name is Elena Rodriguez. I have been serving in combat units for 3 years under documentation that identifies me as male. The patch covers modifications to my uniform that are necessary to maintain that appearance while serving in roles that are not officially open to women." General Hartwell felt as though the floor of the briefing room had suddenly shifted beneath him. His mind raced as he processed what he was hearing, trying to reconcile the exceptional combat record he had reviewed with the revelation that Phoenix was a woman serving in violation of military policies that restricted women from certain combat positions.
"You're saying you're a woman?" he asked, his voice carrying disbelief.
"You've been serving in combat units as a man for 3 years?" "Yes, sir," Elena replied, her posture remaining at attention despite the obvious significance of what she was revealing. "I enlisted with documentation that identified me as male, and I have served with distinction in that capacity. The patch covers binding equipment that allows me to maintain the physical appearance necessary to continue serving in combat roles." Lieutenant Colonel Pierce, who had been taking notes, stopped writing and looked up with an expression that reflected the same shock that General Hartwell was experiencing. In her years of military service, Pierce had encountered many unusual situations, but nothing that approached the complexity of what they were now facing. "Elena," the general said, using her actual name as he tried to process the implications of her revelation, "you understand that women are not permitted to serve in direct combat roles. The policies exist for reasons related to physical standards, unit cohesion, and operational effectiveness." "Sir, with respect, I have proven that those concerns do not apply in my case," Elena responded, her voice carrying a quiet conviction. "My physical performance has exceeded requirements, My presence has not disrupted unit cohesion, and my contributions to operational effectiveness have been documented in 12 successful missions without casualties. General Hartwell stood and walked to the window, his mind working through the unprecedented nature of the situation. Throughout his career, he had dealt with challenges to military policy and protocol, but never anything that forced him to confront the fundamental assumptions underlying those policies in such a direct and personal way. The military's restrictions on women in combat roles were based on studies, traditions, and beliefs about physical capabilities and unit dynamics that had been debated extensively within military leadership circles. General Hartwell had supported these policies throughout his career, believing them necessary for maintaining military effectiveness and unit cohesion. Now he was faced with evidence that directly contradicted those assumptions in the form of a woman who had not only served effectively in combat roles, but had excelled beyond the performance of most male soldiers in similar positions. "Elena," he said, turning back to face her, "what you've done is not only against military policy, but it involved falsifying enlistment documents and maintaining a deception that could have serious legal consequences. You could face court-martial proceedings for fraud and misrepresentation." "I understand the legal implications, sir," Elena replied. "I also understand that my actions have been motivated by a desire to serve my country in the most effective way possible. I have skills and abilities that are valuable to military operations, and the current policies prevent me from contributing those skills in official capacity." General Hartwell found himself in a position he had never expected to face. His commitment to military discipline and adherence to established policies was being challenged by evidence that those policies might be preventing the military from utilizing exceptional talent effectively. "Tell me about your background," he said, settling back into his chair. "How did you develop the skills that have made you so effective in reconnaissance and combat operations?" Elena's posture relaxed slightly, though she remained standing, as was appropriate when addressing a superior officer. "Sir, I grew up in rural Montana, on a ranch where hunting, tracking, and survival skills were part of daily life. My father was a Marine veteran who taught me marksmanship, tactical awareness, and the importance of serving something larger than yourself. When I tried to enlist in roles that would utilize these skills, I was told that my gender prevented me from serving in the positions where I could be most effective. So you decided to circumvent military policy by falsifying your identity?" General Hartwell asked, his tone neutral as he tried to understand her reasoning without prejudging her actions. "I decided to serve my country in the way that would make the best use of my abilities," Elena corrected. "The deception was a means to an end, not an attempt to undermine military authority or discipline." Lieutenant Colonel Pierce looked up from her notes. "Elena, how have you managed to maintain this deception for 3 years? The medical examinations, the physical training, the close quarters living conditions." "Ma'am, it required careful planning and some assistance from sympathetic personnel in administrative positions," Elena admitted. "The binding equipment serves multiple purposes, and I've been fortunate to be assigned to units where privacy is respected and medical examinations are conducted by personnel who understand my situation." General Hartwell's eyebrows raised. "You're saying that other military personnel have been aware of your true identity and have assisted in maintaining this deception?" "Some have suspected, sir, and a few have known with certainty," Elena replied. "In every case, my performance and contributions to mission success have earned their respect and cooperation. No one has felt that my presence compromised unit effectiveness or safety." The general walked back to the tactical maps that covered one wall of the briefing room, studying the areas where Charlie 7 had conducted their most successful operations. The terrain was challenging, the enemy presence was significant, and the tactical complexity of the missions would have tested even the most experienced soldiers. "Your service record indicates that you've been wounded twice in combat," he observed. "How were those situations handled medically?" "The first injury was minor shrapnel that was treated in the field by unit medics who understood my situation," Elena explained. "The second was a gunshot wound to the shoulder that required evacuation to a field hospital. The medical personnel there were informed of the circumstances and provided appropriate care while maintaining the confidentiality of my identity." General Hartwell turned back to face her, his expression reflecting the complexity of emotions he was experiencing. "Elena, what you've accomplished is remarkable from a military effectiveness standpoint. Your courage in combat and your contributions to mission success are undeniable. However, you've also violated fundamental military policies and engaged in systematic deception over an extended period." "I understand your position, sir," Elena replied. "I also hope you understand mine. I have skills and dedication that serve military objectives effectively. The current policies prevent women like me from contributing officially, so I found an unofficial way to serve." Lieutenant Colonel Pierce spoke up. "Eleanor, what is your ultimate goal?" Do you intend to continue this deception indefinitely, or are you hoping that policies will change to allow women to serve officially in combat roles? Ma'am, my immediate goal is to continue serving effectively in whatever capacity allows me to contribute to military objectives, Elena answered. If that means continuing as I have been, I'm prepared to do so. If policy changes create opportunities for official service, I would welcome that possibility. General Hartwell sat back down, his mind working through the implications of what he had learned. The military's policies regarding women in combat were not his to change unilaterally, but his response to Elena's situation would have significant consequences for her future and potentially for broader discussions about military personnel policies.
Elena, I need you to understand the position this puts me in, he said carefully.
I have spent my entire career upholding military discipline and ensuring adherence to established policies. Your situation challenges those policies in ways that I never expected to encounter. Sir, I'm not asking you to compromise your principles or ignore military regulations, Elena replied. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that effective military service can take forms that don't fit perfectly within existing policies. The general studied her face, noting the intelligence in her eyes and the quiet confidence that had characterized her responses throughout their conversation. Elena Rodriguez had not just served effectively in combat roles, she had excelled in ways that forced him to question assumptions he had held throughout his military career. What happens next depends largely on how we proceed from this point, General Hartwell said. I could initiate disciplinary proceedings that would likely result in your discharge and potential criminal charges for fraudulent enlistment. Alternatively, I could explore options that might allow your situation to be addressed through different channels. Elena's expression remained steady, but General Hartwell could see that she understood the gravity of the decision he was facing. Her fate, and potentially the broader question of women's roles in military combat positions, would be determined by how he chose to respond to this unprecedented situation. Sir, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I have never regretted my decision to serve, and I would make the same choice again if faced with similar circumstances, Elena said. The opportunity to contribute to military objectives and to serve alongside the exceptional soldiers in units like Charlie 7 has been the greatest honor of my life. General Hartwell dismissed Elena from the briefing room with instructions to remain available for further discussion while he considered how to proceed. The weight of the decision before him was unlike anything he had faced in his military career. As Elena left, her movements still carrying the confident bearing of an experienced soldier, the general found himself alone with Lieutenant Colonel Pierce, and a situation that had no clear precedent in military protocol. Janet, he said to his aide, using her first name in recognition of the informal nature of their current discussion. In all your years of service, have you ever encountered anything remotely similar to this situation? Pierce shook her head, her expression reflecting the same mixture of surprise and confusion that the general was experiencing. Sir, I've dealt with identity issues, falsified documents, and soldiers attempting to serve in roles for which they weren't qualified, but never anything that combined deception with such exceptional performance.
Elena's service record is genuinely remarkable.
General Hartwell walked to his temporary desk and pulled out Elena's complete service file, which he had requested earlier that morning as part of his preparation for the meeting with Charlie 7. The documents painted a picture of military excellence that was difficult to reconcile with the fact that it had been achieved through systematic violation of military policies. Look at these performance evaluations, he said, spreading the papers across the desk. Superior ratings in every category. Commendations for bravery under fire. Recommendations for advanced training and increased responsibility. Every commanding officer who has worked with Elena has rated her as one of their most valuable personnel. Pierce leaned over to examine the documents, her trained eye quickly processing the information they contained. Sir, what strikes me is not just the consistently high ratings, but the specific language used in these evaluations. Words like exceptional tactical instincts, natural leadership ability, and performs beyond expectations under pressure. These aren't routine evaluations written to meet administrative requirements. The general nodded, noting that Pierce had identified the same pattern he had observed. Military performance evaluations often contained formulaic language and routine assessments that reflected competent but unremarkable service. Elena's file contained the kind of specific, enthusiastic praise that was typically reserved for soldiers who were being recommended for significant advancement or special recognition. I need to understand how this deception has been maintained for 3 years, General Hartwell decided. There are too many people who would have had to be involved, or at least aware of the situation for this to have happened, without some level of systematic support. Over the following days, General Hartwell conducted a discreet investigation into Elena's service history, interviewing former commanding officers, medical personnel, and administrative staff who had worked with her during her time in various assignments. What he discovered challenged many of his assumptions about how military units functioned and how personnel policies were actually implemented at the operational level. Captain Thompson, when questioned more thoroughly about his knowledge of Elena's true identity, admitted that he had suspected the truth within weeks of her assignment to Charlie 7. "Sir, Elena's performance was so exceptional that it raised questions," he explained. "When I looked more closely at her background and observed her interactions with the unit, certain patterns became obvious to anyone who was paying attention." "And you chose not to report these suspicions?" General Hartwell asked, his tone neutral as he tried to understand Thompson's reasoning. "General, Elena was saving lives," Thompson replied with conviction. "Her reconnaissance skills prevented my unit from walking into 3 separate ambush situations. Her tactical recommendations resulted in the successful completion of missions that other units had failed to accomplish. I made a command decision that the safety and effectiveness of my soldiers took priority over administrative concerns about documentation." The general found similar responses from other officers who had worked with Elena. Major Patricia Williams, who had commanded Elena during the previous assignment, provided even more detailed insight into the situation. "General Hartwell, I've been serving in this military for 15 years, and Elena Rodriguez is simply the best combat soldier I've ever worked with," Williams stated during their interview. "When I began to suspect her true identity, I spent weeks observing her interactions with the unit, looking for any signs that her presence was causing problems or compromising effectiveness." "And what did you find?" the general asked. "I found that my soldiers respected and trusted Elena more than most personnel I've commanded," Williams replied. "She earned that respect through competence, courage, and genuine concern for the welfare of her fellow soldiers. The fact that she was a woman didn't matter to the people whose lives she was protecting." General Hartwell's investigation also revealed the network of administrative personnel who had facilitated Elena's continued service. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, a personnel specialist who had processed Elena's assignment paperwork for 2 different units, explained her involvement with remarkable candor. "Sir, when I first encountered Elena's paperwork, certain inconsistencies raised questions," Santos admitted. "When I looked more deeply into her service record and observed her performance, I realized that we were dealing with someone who was serving with exceptional dedication despite policies that would have prevented her from contributing her skills officially." "So you chose to overlook these inconsistencies?" General Hartwell inquired. "I chose to focus on the fact that Elena was serving with honor and making significant contributions to military objectives," Santos replied. "My job is to support effective military personnel, and Elena was clearly one of the most effective soldiers I had encountered." The medical aspects of Elena's deception proved to be equally complex. Dr. Lisa Chang, a field surgeon who had treated Elena's gunshot wound, provided insight into how medical personnel had handled the situation. "General, when Elena was brought to my field hospital, the nature of her injuries and the circumstances made her true identity obvious," Dr. Chang explained. "I was faced with a choice between focusing on providing medical care to a wounded soldier or creating complications that would interfere with that care."
"You chose to maintain the deception?"
General Hartwell asked.
"I chose to prioritize my patient's health and privacy," Dr.
Chang corrected. "Elena had been wounded while serving with courage in combat. My responsibility was to provide appropriate medical care, not to create additional problems for someone who had already sacrificed so much in service to this country." As General Hartwell's investigation continued, he began to understand that Elena's situation was not simply a case of individual deception, but rather an example of how military personnel at various levels had made practical decisions that prioritized mission effectiveness and soldier welfare over strict adherence to policies that seemed increasingly disconnected from operational realities. Colonel Mitchell, the base commander at Camp Resolute, provided perhaps the most comprehensive perspective on Elena's impact during her assignment with Charlie 7. "General, I've been commanding military units for 12 years, and I can tell you that exceptional soldiers are rare," Mitchell explained. "Elena brought skills and capabilities that enhanced every operation she participated in. More importantly, she brought a level of tactical intelligence and situational awareness that kept other soldiers alive." "But you were aware that she was violating military policies regarding women in combat roles?" General Hartwell pressed. "I was aware that Elena was serving effectively in a role where gender was less relevant than competence," Mitchell replied. "My primary responsibility is the successful completion of military objectives and the safety of personnel under my command. Elena contributed significantly to both of those priorities." The general's investigation also revealed specific instances where Elena's contributions had prevented casualties and mission failures. Intelligence reports documented situations where her reconnaissance had identified enemy positions that would have resulted in ambushes, and tactical recommendations she had made had led to the successful completion of operations that had stymied other units. Staff Sergeant Michael Johnson, who had served alongside Elena in 2 different assignments, provided a soldier's perspective on her impact. "Sir, Elena saved my life at least twice that I know of," Johnson stated. "She spotted an IED that our unit would have triggered, and she identified sniper positions that we would have walked into. When you're in combat, you don't care about paperwork or policies. You care about competence and reliability, and Elena had both in abundance." General Hartwell found himself confronting evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness and personnel policies. Elena had not simply served adequately while violating regulations. She had excelled in ways that had enhanced unit effectiveness and saved lives. The investigation also revealed the personal cost that Elena had paid for her decision to serve in combat roles, the constant vigilance required to maintain her deception, the physical discomfort of the binding equipment, and the emotional isolation of being unable to share her true identity with most of her fellow soldiers had created challenges that few people could have sustained over multiple years. Lieutenant Sarah Park, one of the few women serving at Camp Resolute, provided insight into the broader context of women's roles in military operations. "General, I've served in support roles throughout my career, and I've watched exceptional women like Elena be prevented from contributing their full capabilities because of policies that assume limitations rather than evaluating individual merit," Park explained. "Elena found a way to serve effectively despite those limitations, and the results speak for themselves." As General Hartwell compiled the information from his investigation, he realized that Elena's situation was not an isolated case of rule-breaking, but rather a symptom of broader issues within military personnel policies. The exceptional performance of someone serving in violation of established rules raised questions about whether those rules were serving their intended purposes effectively. The general also came to understand that his decision regarding Elena would have implications that extended far beyond her individual case. How he chose to respond would send a message about the military's priorities and its willingness to adapt policies based on evidence of what actually contributed to mission effectiveness. The weight of that responsibility, combined with his growing respect for Elena's service and sacrifice, made the decision before him one of the most challenging of his career. The simple question of whether to enforce uniform regulations had evolved into a complex examination of military policy, individual merit, and the practical requirements of effective military operations. 3 days after his initial confrontation with Elena about the unauthorized patch, General Hartwell sat in his temporary office at Camp Resolute, surrounded by documents that told the story of one of the most remarkable soldiers he had ever encountered. The investigation he had conducted had revealed not just the details of Elena's deception, but also the complex network of support that had enabled her continued service and the profound impact she had made on military operations. The general had spent sleepless nights weighing his options, understanding that his decision would have consequences that extended far beyond Elena's individual case. He could initiate disciplinary proceedings that would likely result in her discharge and potential prosecution for fraudulent enlistment. Such action would uphold established military policies and send a clear message about the importance of adherence to regulations. Alternatively, he could explore options that might allow Elena's exceptional service to be recognized while addressing the policy violations in a way that didn't destroy the career of someone who had served with such distinction. This approach would require creativity and potentially set precedents that could influence broader discussions about military personnel policies. General Hartwell had requested a secure video conference with General Patricia Morrison, his immediate superior, and one of the highest-ranking women in military leadership. Morrison's experience and perspective would be crucial in determining how to proceed with Elena's case. "Marcus," General Morrison said as the connection established, her face appearing on the screen with the clarity that modern military communications technology provided. "I received your preliminary report about the Elena Rodriguez situation. This is certainly unprecedented in my experience. Patricia, I've been struggling with this decision for days," General Hartwell admitted, using the informal tone that their long professional relationship allowed. "Every principle I've upheld throughout my career says that policies must be enforced consistently, regardless of individual circumstances, but the evidence of Elena's effectiveness is overwhelming." "Tell me about the impact on unit cohesion," Morrison requested. "One of the primary concerns about women in combat roles has been the potential for disruption of unit dynamics." General Hartwell consulted his notes. "Every interview I conducted indicated that Elena's presence enhanced unit cohesion rather than disrupting it. Soldiers respected her competence and trusted her judgment. Several officers mentioned that their units performed better when Elena was part of the team." "And her physical capabilities?" Morrison continued. "The physical standards for combat roles exist for practical reasons. Elena has consistently exceeded physical requirements. the general replied. Her endurance, strength, and tactical mobility have been superior to most male soldiers in comparable positions. The binding equipment she uses to maintain her appearance hasn't compromised her physical performance in any measurable way. General Morrison was quiet for a moment, processing the information she was receiving.
Marcus, what's your assessment of Elena's motivations?
Is this someone who is trying to circumvent policies for personal reasons, or someone who is genuinely committed to serving effectively? Everything I've learned suggests that Elena was motivated by a genuine desire to serve her country in the most effective way possible, General Hartwell replied. The deception was a means to achieve that service, not an attempt to gain advantages or avoid responsibilities. She's taken on more dangerous assignments and shown greater dedication than most soldiers who are serving officially. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with both generals exploring the implications of various approaches to Elena's situation. They discussed legal precedents, policy considerations, and the potential impact on broader military effectiveness. Finally, General Morrison made a decision that would shape Elena's future. Marcus, I'm authorizing you to handle this situation through non-judicial channels. Elena's service record and the testimony from personnel who have worked with her suggest that she represents exceptional talent that should be retained if possible. What specifically are you authorizing? General Hartwell asked. I'm authorizing you to work with Elena to transition her service to an official capacity that recognizes her contributions while addressing the documentation issues, Morrison replied. This will involve some creative personnel management, but her skills are too valuable to lose over technicalities. 2 hours later, General Hartwell requested another private meeting with Elena in the same briefing room where their initial confrontation had taken place. This time, however, the atmosphere was entirely different. Elena entered with the same professional bearing she had displayed before, but the general's demeanor reflected the respect and understanding that had developed through his investigation. Elena, General Hartwell began, I've completed a comprehensive review of your service record and the circumstances surrounding your situation. I want you to know that what you've accomplished as a soldier is truly remarkable. Elena's expression remained neutral, though the general could see that she was listening carefully to every word. Thank you, sir. I hope my service has been worthy of the opportunities I've been given. Your service has been exceptional by any reasonable standard, the general replied. The question now is how to proceed in a way that recognizes your contributions while addressing the policy issues that your situation has raised. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Elena, I'm prepared to offer you an opportunity to transition to official service in a capacity that utilizes your skills and acknowledges your experience. This would involve working through administrative channels to resolve the documentation issues and potentially pioneering new approaches to personnel policies. Elena's composure finally cracked, and the general could see emotions crossing her face that she had clearly been suppressing for years.
Sir, are you saying that I could continue serving officially?
I'm saying that your demonstrated competence in the needs of military operations suggest that we should find ways to utilize exceptional talent regardless of the traditional limitations that might have prevented such service, General Hartwell replied.
The process won't be simple, and it will require patience and flexibility from everyone involved, but your service record has earned you the opportunity. What would this transition involve? Elena asked, her voice carrying hope for the first time since their initial meeting. General Hartwell outlined the plan that he and General Morrison had developed. Elena would be transferred to a special assignment that would allow her to serve officially, while broader policy discussions took place at higher levels of military leadership. Her experience and proven effectiveness would be valuable in developing new approaches to personnel utilization and combat effectiveness. There's one condition, the general added. The unauthorized patch that started this entire discussion will need to be removed as part of your transition to official service. Elena smiled, and for the first time since their meeting began, the general could see the person behind the soldier. Sir, the patch was never about defying regulations. It was about finding a way to serve effectively, despite policies that would have prevented that service. If I can serve officially, the patch has served its purpose. She reached up and carefully began removing the embroidered phoenix from her uniform, revealing the binding equipment underneath that had been necessary to maintain her masculine appearance. This phoenix represented rebirth and renewal. I think it's appropriate that removing it marks the beginning of a new phase of service. General Hartwell watched as Elena handled the patch with obvious care and respect. What will you do with it? I think I'll keep it as a reminder of what's possible when someone is committed to serving something larger than themselves, Elena replied. And maybe someday when policies have evolved to the point where other women can serve officially in combat roles, It can represent the bridge between what was and what became possible. The general nodded, understanding the symbolic significance of the moment. Elena, I want you to know that your courage in revealing your true identity took as much bravery as anything you've done in combat. It would have been easier to continue the deception than to risk exposure and potential prosecution. Sir, living authentically while serving effectively seemed like the right choice, Elena replied. I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue serving in a way that honors both my capabilities and military objectives. As their meeting concluded, General Hartwell reflected on how much his understanding had changed over the previous few days. A routine enforcement of uniform regulations had led to one of the most profound learning experiences of his military career. Elena Rodriguez had forced him to examine assumptions about military effectiveness, personnel policies, and the relationship between individual merit and institutional requirements. The unauthorized patch that had triggered their initial confrontation had indeed been removed, but its removal marked the beginning of a new chapter rather than the end of Elena's military service. General Hartwell understood that Elena's situation would likely influence broader discussions about military policies for years to come. 6 months later, General Hartwell received a letter from Elena, who was serving with distinction in her new official capacity. The letter included a photograph of her current unit, where she was serving as a tactical instructor, helping to train other soldiers in the reconnaissance and combat skills that had made her so effective. In the letter, Elena wrote, "General, the Phoenix patch represented my belief that people could be reborn into roles that allowed them to serve more effectively. Your decision to support my transition to official service proved that institutions can also experience that kind of renewal when they're guided by leaders who prioritize effectiveness over tradition." General Hartwell kept that letter in his desk drawer, along with the after-action reports that documented Elena's continued exceptional performance. Whenever he faced difficult decisions about personnel policies or military effectiveness, he would remember the soldier who had worn an unauthorized patch and the lesson she had taught him about the difference between following rules and achieving objectives. The patch had been removed, but its meaning lived on in the career of an exceptional soldier and in the understanding of a general who had learned that sometimes the most important military victories happen not on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when leaders choose to recognize merit over convention and effectiveness over tradition. Elena Rodriguez continued to serve with distinction, officially and authentically, proving every day that the courage represented by her Phoenix patch had been worth preserving and honoring. And General Marcus Hartwell carried forward the knowledge that true military leadership sometimes required the wisdom to understand when rules should evolve to better serve the mission and the people dedicated to accomplishing it.